Good morning, distinguished participants. I don't know the protocol that has been established, but I stand on it. I have to apologize for coming a bit late. Yesterday I was out of town and just got in late in the evening. My name is Yerima Peter Tarfa. I'm the director of the Department of Climate Change in the Federal Ministry of Environment, as well as the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change focal point for Nigeria. For us, this particular workshop is a very timely workshop in the sense that it's giving us an opportunity to interface with the major stakeholders in the implementation of climate change activities in Nigeria. The Department of Climate Change, apart from being the national focal point on climate change, is also the designated national authority for the Kyoto Protocol Adaptation Fund, as well as the focal point 2 for assessing resources from the Green Climate Fund. So I'm very sure that at the end of all this workshop we are doing, one key thing I will be looking out for is a robust proposal that will enable Nigeria to benefit from the Green Climate Fund in undertaking some mitigation or adaptation activities in the health sector. When before the Paris Agreement was adopted in 2015, all countries were requested to prepare a document known as the Nationally Determined Contribution. For Nigeria, it was prepared and it was signed by the highest political leadership of this country before it was eventually submitted to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. That singular document is very robust because it touched across various sectors, the major economic sectors of the country, and also the major emitters of the greenhouse gases in the country. One of the key areas is in the area of agriculture and in the area of waste. Basically, if we looked at the aspect of agriculture, once there's food insecurity, it has huge implication on health delivery. Similarly, in the area of water, once water is contaminated, it also has a lot of health implication, as well as in the area of pollution coming out from the transportation sector and the industries. Power is also a major sector which the Nigeria's NDC looked into, and we believe that aspect of health is cross-cutting across all these major sectors. I know that I have only 20 minutes, so I will try to maximize it. So what I just did is to give us a little background. Maybe if you can run through the slide, maybe starting with the first one. It's just to try to contextualize this aspect of climate change, its definition, even in the first instance. What does climate change means? And how does it touch on the livelihoods of all and sundry? There are several definitions that has been put forward. For some, it is simply a matter of just changes in weather patterns. Things are a bit hot or a bit colder or a bit more uncertain. That is what some people understand by issues of climate change. For others, it is already a matter of survival That is, there's too little water or too much, not enough food to go around, risks to safety and security. This is what others, if you go to the street now and ask individual to define to you what climate change is all about. For the layman that did not have a clear scientific definition of climate change, he will tell you that, oh, the weather is a bit hot or is a bit cold. There are changes. When I was growing up, it was not like this, but presently this is what I'm feeling. But for others, it will say, oh, there's too little water, or there's too much water, or there's not enough food to go around, or there's risks to safety and security as a whole. All this, what the individuals are saying, they are just narrating the consequences of climate change. For others, climate change can be defined as a weather pattern, changes in weather pattern over many years in a wide area. It could be a region, it could be global as a whole. What period? A very long period. Nothing less than 100 years, 50 years and above. Something that when you are studying, you have. It's not the daily weather changes, but we are talking of climate change over a long range of time. It is a change in global or regional climate pattern. However, we know that climate change is a natural phenomena. But however, there are rapid changes over the past 150 to 200 years due to human activities. That is why the global community came together to define it and said, look, it is something that is happening due to anthropogenic changes in the activities of humans. Anthropogenic is just human. However, the authority that defines climate change is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. This is a body that has been put together both by WMO and by UNEP to define or to is an independent body that undertakes research, is apolitical, is a scientific based. And all scientists all over the world, including yourselves here. So I want to also use this opportunity to extend an invitation to national experts that are within us here today to avail themselves of the opportunity to register on the roster of experts of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. The Department of Climate Change is the focal point for the IPCC. If you come forward or just send email to me with your CV that I'm an expert in this area, I've studied this and I want to go global, let the international community know I am there. I will be able to review literatures that talked about impact of climate change on health and so many other things. It is free. Once you write to us, we will give you the link, you register, and then the IPCC at their headquarters will evaluate your papers and be able to register you as a global expert. And you can be everywhere all over the world doing what you know best. So human activities are altering the chemical composition of the atmosphere by adding more greenhouse gases, such as carbon dioxide, methane, which generally we get them from waste, nitrous oxide, water vapor, and ozone. So generally, we are contributing to changes in the climate by, if we calculate our carbon footprints, every individual is generating huge amount of resources. Even for flying down from wherever down to Abuja, you came by air. The carbon footprint of flying is an additional issue that is contributing to climate change. The greenhouse gases absorb and trap the sun's heat, leading to global warming and its consequential effects, such as the sea level rise, desertification, flooding, which we have been experiencing. Yesterday on the network news, there was a warning that so many states of the country will be flooded due to consequences of climate change. Next slide, please. Who is managing the... So here I just want to give, I adopted this from the UNDP, the climate change impacts. It leads to changes in biodiversity, forestry composition, health, and productivity. So if you look at this, health is seriously impacted by climate change. So what is happening? Tackling climate change is more or less like a preventive approach to solving health challenges, rather than going to see the doctor for him to prescribe some medication for you. But if you are able to tackle climate change, you are invariably also solving health challenges. Agriculture too, forestry is over there too. What are the uses of forest? They serve as sinks. And once you cut down your trees, you are reducing your sinks, you are reducing the vegetational cover of the country, and then the absorption of the greenhouse gases too is limited. In the aspect of water, there's variability in water supply, its quality and distribution, more competition and cross-border conflicts over water resources. I'm sure I'm preaching to the converts in the sense that you know the implication and consequences of inadequate water availability on health. We are having serious challenges in the northeast, the conflict of the Boko Haram, which could be attributed to dwindling natural resources. So it's conflict over natural resources that is leading to what we are seeing. There's forceful migration from there. If you should take also an epidemiological studies of diseases, prevalent diseases over there, there has also been a lot of increase. So what we should also do from the health sector is not just to restrict ourselves to treating diseases, but we should also go further to intervene in the northeast and other regions of the country that are impacted by climate change that has led to some consequences in health challenges. Now, nutrition, the food the individuals take in that area, you know, is no more qualitative. Life expectancy has also dropped drastically. There's no enough water, a lot of conflicts. Agricultural practices too has so been eroded. So if you look, there's increasing incidences of infectious, waterborne and vector-borne diseases, heat stresses and mortality, which leads to additional public health burden. I'm sure if the Director of Finance of Ministry of Health is here and the budget people, they will tell you, you keep on seeking for increase in budgetary allocation for you to solve one problem or the other. But what is really causing this is consequences like this. So our relationship, I know that the Ministry of Health is a member of the Interministerial Committee on Climate Change, and we have been working together closely, even with WHO, to see possibilities of developing a vulnerability mapping and a vulnerability index in the area of health for Nigeria. There will be less predictability in crop yield, changing irrigation demands, growing risks of pest infestations. These are all having very direct bearing on health delivery. In the area of erosion too, so many of our water bodies has been inundated. There's salinization, there's stress on the mangroves, marshes, as well as the wetlands. The Hadejaguru wetlands is not what it was before. And you know, it used to serve as so many birds, even from across Europe, cross on a yearly basis to come to that area. At the end of winter, they go back. But once climate change has so affected that area and the wetlands is almost gone, then what are the challenges? And in terms of mitigation, we know that the mangroves are a major sinks to greenhouse gases, but they are being eradicated or being lost due to climate change in the coastal part of the country. Oil too, the spillage of oil is really affecting the mangroves in that area, and it has a lot of consequences on aquatic life as well as food that is coming from the sea. Next. What of ecosystems? So if you look here now, is there any sector that is not affected by climate change? I have not seen any yet. Even our tourism, ecosystem services too, there's loss of habitat, species, protective ecosystems, and migratory shifts. All these are consequences that are arisen due to climate change. So if you are able to solve or tackle climate change from your own sector, certainly you are solving a lot of these problems. You know, in our NDC, the federal government of Nigeria committed to reducing emissions by 20% unconditionally by the year 2030. And this reduction in emissions is supposed to be across the economy. There's shift now in transportation system. The government is introducing a lot of rails transportation. It's also the Dangote trucks are being retrofitted to use ethanol rather than the normal diesel, which emits a lot of greenhouse gases. It's a one-ross tax on us in the Department of Climate Change to quantify all these emissions across the sector and to be able to report to the international community that we are meeting the 20% unconditional. At this United Nations General Assembly that is coming up in September, the UN Secretary General is organizing a Climate Action Summit on the 23rd of September. And he has urged leaders across the world to come with pronouncement of concrete actions they intend to take to meet the Paris Agreement. For Nigeria now, what can we say we are doing in the area of health, in the health sector, to contribute as a concrete activity that our president will be able to say to the international community at that summit, so that by and by we are contributing to that emission reduction. Also, we commit to reducing that emissions by 45% conditionally. That is with the help of the international community. WHO is there. Your other partners that you have are all there. What are you doing together to work towards meeting even 45%? We are in discussions with the EU. There are a lot of solar renewable energy projects across the country, which EU is supporting. They are also supporting in Kano and Ogun State in the area of emission reduction from waste. So what are the implications? How can the health sector really relate with them in that area? We are also a member of the United Nations, United Nations Development Program, NDC support program. We also belong to the NDC partnership as well as the 2050 pathway platform, all working towards helping Nigeria to meet that 45% conditional. Next slide. This, I may not dwell much on this, but I'm just trying to relate to you the climate change and health. There are direct effects, there are indirect effects, there are social dynamics there, and everything we are doing about this climate change is bread and butter. But the central issue is on humans. We are doing to control all this so that we'll have a better livelihood. So we have to see, what do we do, direct effect, what are the solutions, which I have highlighted some of them. Next slide. These two that looks like a biochemistry, maybe I'm talking to medical people here, the biochemistry pathway, but there's also a pathway in climate change. You can see for yourself that there are driving forces, population dynamics, and sustainable economic development that leads to greenhouse gases emissions, that leads to climate change, that leads to regional weather changes, heat waves, extreme weather, temperatures, precipitations, as well as microbial contamination pathways, transmission dynamics, ecosystem hydrology, socioeconomic demographics, as well as a lot of the health-specific adaptation measures. So these are researches that can be undertaken. You can undertake research in the health-specific adaptation measures, in evaluation of adaptation itself, and leading to, these are all the health effects. Next slide. In aspect of climate change and infectious diseases, we know that increasing temperatures and changes in precipitation pattern leads to, it impacts the habitat distribution, as well as mating cycles of disease-carrying vectors, e.g. mosquitoes, ticks, and the rest of them. The frequency and intensity of extreme precipitation and flooding leads to waterborne diseases. I know that the federal government have set up a national committee being led by NEMA, the National Emergency Management Agency. NAMET is a member. I believe also Health will be a member of that national committee, in the sense that once there's flooding, apart from destruction of infrastructure and our farmlands, it also enhances or increases waterborne diseases. So you have to be prepared to see what you can do. I'm rounding up very soon, 2 minutes. So higher ambient temperatures will increase the replication cycle of foodborne pathogens such as Salmonella, as well as E. coli, and Campylobacter, as well as also increasing drought, such as increased risks of food and waterborne illnesses. I've been asked to this paper from that perspective, that is climate change and conflicts, implication for emerging infectious diseases and biosecurity. Next slide. This is a popular map that everyone has seen, talking about climate change and malaria, increases in prevalence of malaria. In fact, this last June, and I think up to now, major part of Europe, the temperatures have so increased. The weather was extremely hot. We were there in June for the subsidiary body meeting in Bonn. It was hotter than Abuja. So what is the implication for diseases? Areas that hitherto mosquitoes don't breed, now you start having mosquitoes breeding in such places. The kind of foods, crops that grow in that area, but with the changes in weather, it affects harvest. Next. In the area of biosecurity, it has also multiple definitions according to disciplines. Originally, it was a set of preventive measures designed to reduce the risks of transmission of infectious diseases in crops and livestock, quarantine pests, invasive alien species, and living modified organisms. It was further defined, it was first used by the agriculturalists and the environmental community. This term emerged in the late 1990s in response to the threat of biological terrorism, of which up to now the threat is there. Next. You can see even aspect of Ebola and things like that. There's another school of thoughts that were thinking that, look, it was some, researches that were being undertaken in certain laboratories and something just escaped. I don't know how true. Next. The National Academy of Sciences defined it as security against the inadvertent, inappropriate, or intentional, malicious, or malevolent use of potentially dangerous biological agents or biotechnology, including the development, production, stockpiling, or use of biological weapons, as well as outbreaks of newly emerging and endemic diseases. So, weapons that are now being used, when you hear that a country have weapon of mass destruction, it may not necessarily be only guns. It could be even biological warfare, which can be used to release and destroy a lot of humanity. Next slide. Next slide. For us in the Department of Climate Change, representing the federal government, so many things have been done. We have a national policy on climate change. We also, like I said, we served as the designated authority for Green Climate Fund, Adaptation Fund, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the Global Environment Facility, and the rest of them. We also developed the nationally determined contribution document, which is available if you are interested to see what did we say about the health sector. We have the West African Science Service Center and on climate change and adaptive land use, which is known as WASCAL, that has 2 training centers or linkage competence centers. This is an initiative of the government of Germany plus the West of ECOWAS as a whole, the states in ECOWAS. We have 2 centers, one in Mina, one in Akure. They are training students up to PhD level, and they undertake serious researches, and those researches also touches on all sectors. So if you have some specific research that you want them to do on the area of health, you can contact them through us. We have the Interministerial Committee on Climate Change, of which Ministry of Health is a member. From the legislative side, government have put in place the Senate and House Committee on Climate Change. We have enhanced advocacy on the area of climate change. There's a global climate diplomacy, of which Mr. President attends virtually all the COPs, the Conference of Parties, since the inception of his administration. He has already indicated that he'll be in Chile in December for COP25. So this is giving the country the highest political buy-in in what we are doing. We have generated knowledge products on climate change in several spheres, and I challenge or invite the health sector too. Let's work together and produce some literatures for the benefit of our country. Finally, I think I'll just say that we have issued the sovereign green bonds. Nigeria is the first to issue in Africa, and then the 4th in the world. We've issued the first, we've issued the second. We are now working on the 3rd, of which the health sector has also brought in projects. They want to retrofit the power supply in your cold, how do you call them? Cold storage facilities across the country where you store your vaccines and other medication. You are powering it with generators, but we want you to power it with renewable energy using solar. Just last Friday, the Vice President commissioned a project in a university, Alex Ikweme Federal University in Ebonyi State, that is energizing education. That is all the universities in Nigeria, the 36 federal universities, going down the line in the next 4 to 5 years, they will all be powered by solar, so leading to reduction of emissions. Then this, I have to maybe stop because time is against me, just the next one. In conclusion, climate change may already be causing a significant burden in developing countries. Biosecurity risks are perceived to have increased with extreme climate events. There's unmitigated climate change is likely to cause significant public health impacts from now to 2030 and even beyond. Adaptive and flexible strategies and actions can help reduce climate change impacts in the health sector and biosecurity. Thank you very much. I think that is the end of my presentation. I kept the time.
Yeah. Well,
Thank you.
thank you so much. Before your arrival, we had said after 3 presentations, we will take questions. So while you were making your presentation, I could see them, participants making some jottings. I hope that those will translate to questions after the 3rd presentation. So the GET Consortium, I'm sure you see an opportunity for collaboration here with the Department of Climate Change. Next on the agenda is a presentation by Dr. Bobadoye Ayodotun. Ayodotun is the Chief Operating Officer of the Global Emerging Pathogens Treatment Consortium. He has a BSc in Animal Science, an MTech in Animal Production and Health, and a PhD in Climate Change and Adaptation from the Institute of Climate Change and Adaptation, University of Nairobi, Kenya. He has over 12 years research and teaching experience with the African Technology and Policy Studies Network in Nairobi and the Forestry Research Institute of Nigeria. He is a scholar of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, Washington, D.C., and also a scholar of Africa Science Service Center on Climate Change and Adapted Land Use. Dr. Bobadoye is well-skilled in transdisciplinary research approach. He has led many internationally funded research projects bordering on climate change, natural resource management, science, technology, and innovation systems, development issues, policy development, analysis and advocacy, technology management and transfer, and private sector engagement. Is a member of many professional organizations and has published over 15 journal articles in reputable journals. Please put your hands together as he takes the stage for his presentation. So you have 20 minutes.
I'll try my best. Yeah, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'll be speaking on understanding the impact of climate change and conflicts on biosecurity and emerging infectious diseases in Africa. And if you look at the topic, is the same topic the last presenter presented. That shows that I'm on the same page with my boss. And that was a nice presentation, Doc. So that's the outline of the study. We'll start from what is climate change down to what are the solutions. What is climate change? The last presenter dwelled so much on climate change, but the truth is that the climate of the Earth is changing, and climate change has become one of the biggest challenges facing humanity today. From Africa to Europe to Asia, everywhere in the world, we are having challenges with climate change. And Africa is not left behind as a continent. In Africa, we are having extreme weather conditions, extreme heat, as a result of climate change. causes of climate change. The truth is that this is not the first time the climate of the Earth will be changing. Some few million years ago, we had a period when paleoclimatologists said we had the Ice Age. That was when most part of the world was cold. And from the Ice Age, we moved gradually to what we call the Holocene. Atmosphere and causing what we call climate change. And this picture depicts how climate change or what is causing climate change presently. The sun is the only source of energy to the earth, and it releases its energy in form of sun rays, short ultraviolet rays. Those rays comes to the earth's surface, and part of those rays is absorbed by the earth, and other is reflected back to the atmosphere. But what those greenhouse gases do is that they have the ability to absorb the long infrared rays reflected back to the atmosphere and re-emit it to the lower atmosphere and Earth's surface, causing gradual warming of the lower atmosphere and causing what we call global warming today. And that is what is affecting the climate of the Earth, causing climate change. This picture depicts the increase in the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere between 1870 and 2014. And we can see that different sectors of human beings have contributed to increase in carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere. You can see that coal contributed 89 parts per million, oil contributed 67 parts per million, gas 28 parts per million, cement 5 parts per million. Land use, that's deforestation and other activities, contributed 69 parts per million. And we had land sink removing 75 parts per million, that's afforestation and other activities. And the ocean sink removing 73 parts per million. So between 1870 and 2014, the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has increased from 288 parts per million to almost 400 parts per million. Yeah. Evidence of climate change. Even without the science, anybody that lives on the surface of the earth knows that something is changing. The weathers are becoming unpredictable, extreme temperature in different parts of the world. But empirical evidence has also shown that this is true. We can see the change in average global temperature from 1880 to 2014. And we can see that in recent years, we are having record-breaking temperatures in 1998, 2003, 2005, 2010, 2013, 2014. And it continues like that. In 2019, we are having one of the hottest years in the history of the planet. And temperatures in Europe is getting above 35 degrees centigrade. And in Asia, we're having temperature that is crossing 40 degrees centigrade, showing clearly that the weather or the climate of the earth is changing. Yeah. Okay. Rainfall anomalies in Africa between 1900 and 1990. You can see from 1980 to 1990, and even it continues, we can see that there's a change in pattern of rainfall around this place within the continent. So the rainfall are reducing and the pattern is changing in recent years. All these are evidences of a changing climate. Temperature and precipitation projection from IPCC 2012. We notice the temperature change for regions in Africa, for Comasa, that's East African region, for West African region and Central African region. See that we have sharp increase in temperature, predicted temperature for each of the regions. And the fearful thing is that these predicted temperatures for Africa is even higher than average predicted temperature for the whole world. that shows that temperatures most likely will increase at higher rates than the average increase in temperature globally. Yeah. So how do we relate climate change with conflicts? In recent years, we've had increase in internal conflicts within the continent in different countries. In Nigeria, we've been battling, not just Nigeria, in West Africa, we've been battling with Boko Haram. We've been battling with the herdsmen, farmer clashes. In East Africa, they are battling with Al-Shabaab, Kenya, Somalia. In Congo DR, they are battling with MM24. And we have different internal conflicts and rebel groups springing up on the continent. So I've identified 3 drivers of these conflicts. The first one is climate change and environment. Second one is population growth. Population of Africa has increased from about 400 million in 1960 to about 1.3 billion in the year 2019, and population continues to grow. And the third one is bad governance. So how do we relate climate change to conflicts, and how does it affect the economy of countries in Africa? Let's start with drought. In Namibia, between 2003 and 2004, the government of Namibia spent between $43 to $48 million for emergency relief due to drought. Kenya spent about $2.8 billion in the year 2000 as a result of drought. And as at that time, the GDP of Kenya was less than $20 billion. So that's over 10% of the GDP of the whole country. The same for Cameroon and Nigeria. And as we speak now, we're having serious challenges in different countries in Africa. In Zimbabwe, presently is having serious challenges with drought and having serious challenge with feeding its people as a result of serious droughts in that region and in that country. Yeah, climate extreme and economic growth in Kenya. This graph depicts or relates drought index with GDP growth. And we can see that when there is serious drought in the country, the GDP goes down. And when there is good rain, the GDP goes up. I want to say this is not just for Kenya. This depicts what happens in most African countries. That is because in Africa, most African countries, agriculture accounts for between 50 to 70% of the total GDP. And in Africa, between 70 to 90% of agriculture in Africa is rain-fed. So anything that affects the rains affects agriculture, and anything that affects agriculture directly affects the GDP. Yeah, the Lake Chad Basin. The Lake Chad used to provide water and source of livelihood for about 20 million people in 4 different countries in West Africa. But you can see how the lake is drying up. See the size of the lake in 1963. And see what we have in 2007. It has lost almost 90% of its total water content, affecting the livelihood of between 20 to 30 million people. The United Nations says about 10.7 million people in the Lake Chad Basin need humanitarian relief to survive. So it became a good breeding ground for rebel groups and non-state armed actors, and today is home to the second deadliest terror group in the world that killed about 1,600 people in the year 2017 alone. Land degradation. Nigeria is losing about 350 hectares of land to desertification every year. That's about 63% of the total land mass of the country, and it's affecting almost 65%. It's affecting 16 states in the country. Nigeria has one of the highest, if not the highest, deforestation rates in the world. And Africa as a continent itself is susceptible to land degradation and bears the greatest impact of drought and desertification. It's estimated that 2/3 of African lands is already degraded to some extent. Land degradation is affecting at least 700 million people in Africa. That's about twice the population of the whole of the United States of America and almost the population of Europe. So you can see the challenges we're having with land degradation and climate change within the continent. And nowhere else in the world is more impacted by drought, land degradation, and desiccation than in Africa. Population growth. Africa is the youngest continent in the world, a median age of about 19.4, growing from 400 million to 1.3 billion within 4 decades. Projection says by the year 2050, Nigeria will be the third most populated country in the world, after India and China. So all these challenges put together, by 2040, the world's largest population force will be in Africa, with an estimated working age population of 1 billion people. That means within the next 20 years, we have 1 billion people that are within the working age on the continent. 1 billion people is about 3 times the population of the US. So if we don't take all these challenges serious, the present migration we are seeing from Africa to Europe is a tip of the iceberg. This population, if they are not well trained and not well educated, then it can become a big challenge, not just to the continent, but to the whole world. Yeah. Implication of climate change and the unrest we're experiencing in Africa, the conflict we're experiencing in Africa on biosecurity and emerging infectious diseases. The first question is, what is biosecurity? And the last presenter gave the definition. But simply, biosecurity is from 2 words, biology and security. So when you put the two together, simply it means securing biological materials in such a way that it doesn't cause harm, it doesn't cause disease, and it doesn't cause risk to humans, to animals, to plants, and their shared environment. That's a simple definition of biosecurity. But the former speaker gave this detailed definition too. Yeah. Implications. Climate change and conflict increase migration of human and animal hosts. Humans and animals are constantly moving, looking for better environments, looking for better sources of livelihood. And this constant migration between humans and animals is leading to greater contact between the animals and human beings. And this contact is increasing the prevalence of zoonotic disease all over the world, especially in Africa. A typical example is what happened in West Africa years ago, when some young boys looking for good food and looking for protein went and killed some bats and eggs. And that was the beginning of the Ebola crisis we had in West Africa some years ago that led to the death of thousands of people and countries losing their economic value as a result of just some few boys that want to enjoy themselves with bats. So vectors are sensitive to climate temperature variability. Mosquito, ticks, and sandflies are ectothermic. That means their life cycle depends or is influenced by changing in weather conditions. And now we are having malaria prevalence in areas we never used to have malaria prevalence in Africa as a result of changing temperature and changing weather conditions. Yeah. The World Health Organization, WHO, reports that the incidence of Lassa fever is increasing, perhaps as a consequence of climate change, as is the severity and the case fatality rates of the disease. This map shows distribution of Lassa fever in West. It shows the distribution of Lassa fever in West African countries in recent decades. And we can see that from the year 2000, there's an increase in the frequency and intensity of Lassa fever within the region. This has been attributed to increase in contact between human beings and the rodents that is causing Lassa fever, and is increasing the incidence, the frequency and intensity of the disease in West Africa. Yeah. Increase in internal conflict and climate change can increase the chances of deadly biological samples getting to the wrong hands. A very good example is what we are going through, what is happening in Congo DR now, when we are having an epidemic, Ebola epidemic, in an area where we have high rebel presence and high presence of non-state armed actors. Just imagine one sample of Ebola getting to the hand of a rebel group and he decides to use it as a biological weapon. Just one sample from Congo DR, taking it across the border to maybe Kenya or Tanzania or Uganda, or just flying it takes just like 2 hours to fly from Congo DR to West Africa. It takes just like 5 hours to fly from Congo DR to Europe. So that may be a big challenge, not just to Congo DR, but to any part of the world, because mobility is easier in the world now as a result of globalization. So these challenges of making sure that deadly biological samples does not get to the hands of non-state actors is what's part of the biggest challenges we're facing, not just in Congo DR, but we're facing on the planet today. Now, more than 269,000 samples of Ebola were extracted from patients during the West African outbreak. And we are not sure the number of samples that we can account for out of the 269,000 samples that were collected. So what is the solution to all these challenges we've been facing? The challenges of conflict, climate change, and increasing emerging infectious diseases within the continent. The truth is that the problem did not start in one day, and we will not fix it. The solution will not come in one day. But we have to understand that the problems are not going away. And we have to work together, both governments, private sectors, and NGOs, to see how we can address these challenges we're facing on the continent. But I'm going to make a few suggestions and to addressing the challenges. The first one is understanding the concept, the One Health concept. The One Health concept is a transdisciplinary approach. The One Health concept is a transdisciplinary approach to addressing emerging health issues anywhere in the world. It is becoming clear that human beings cannot live in isolation of its ecosystem. And we have to continue to understand the interrelationship between human beings, animals, plants, and their shared environment in planning policies and planning strategies to address human problems or human health challenges. And this One Health approach is what, at all levels of government, state, local governments, regional levels, and national government should understand, have a deeper understanding, and continue to adopt to address the modern challenges, health challenges that we're facing within the continent and different countries in Africa. Yeah. Climate change is not all about negativity. Climate change gives especially developing countries an opportunity to develop in a different direction. In Africa, we have a lot of renewable energies, coal, solar, hydropower. In fact, it is said that the amount of sun in Africa can generate up to 1,000 gigawatts of electricity. And Nigeria is still struggling with generating less than 2,000 megawatts. So instead of just allowing the sun to continue to beat us, we can decide to develop in a different direction using these renewable sources of energy that is abundant within the country or within the continent. And climate change also offers opportunity of developing in different ways, not just in renewable energy, even in agriculture. We can embrace things like climate smart agriculture, agriculture that enhances adaptation, that increases production, and reduces the amount of greenhouse gases that is emitted in the atmosphere. And that can be a good way of development for countries within the continent and a way of boosting our economies and providing jobs for our youth. Yeah, population increase can be an advantage depending on how you use it. Countries in the world, countries like China and India, have been able to maximize their human resources to develop their countries and their economies. Ability to train and provide the right training and education for our youth can be a right step in using the human resources within the continent to develop the continent. African countries should as a matter of urgency, start moving away from natural dependent economy to innovation, technology, and manufacturing development, or providing economies. We should start focusing on things like innovation, like technology and manufacturing, instead of depending on natural resources. And if we provide the right training that will solve the challenges of today and the challenges of tomorrow, not training for the jobs of yesterday that don't exist anymore, then Africa too, and countries in Africa can be able to maximize their population to solve the challenges and drive their economies. Yeah, good governance. This has been one of the biggest challenges we have in Africa. It's not my area of specialty, but I know that we can't continue the same way and expect a different result. African leaders have to start seeing governance as something that is very serious. And decisions have to be taken based on empirical evidence, not based on religion, feelings, or ethnicity. Yeah, so finally, what do we see? You can tell me what this is. How many people see old woman? How many people see pretty lady? You saw both. So this can be the future of Africa. If we continue the same way and we continue business as usual, then Africa can end up being an old woman that will be a burden to itself and a burden to the whole world. But if we adjust, change a lot of things, governance, good governance, maximize the benefits of climate change, and start moving in a different positive direction, then Africa can be the pride of the world, that the whole continent or the whole world we want to do business with, and a place where everybody will want to come. The choice is for African leaders and African elites. Yeah, what will the future hold? This problem of climate change is not going anywhere. Education and training can make a difference. Thank you. And that's it.
Thank you, Dr. Babade. I will have asked them to put their hands together one more time for you. I didn't ask you to clap for him now. Why will he be using an example of an old woman and a young woman as an old woman being a burden? Old men are burdened too, more so than old women. Old women can take care of themselves. Old men cannot. So your next presentation, look at the gender dimension of whatever it is, especially when you have a gender expert in the house. Prof has suggested that since the two presentations are related, that we should take questions now because the next one is totally different from what we have. So we have climate change, the impacts for our health and for EIDs. So we will take questions from the boss and his boy. They had their presentations. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Everybody. Okay, we'll go from one table to the other. But then please keep your questions short and sharp. Please come. So we'll start from this table.
Good morning, all. Thank you for the very educative presentation. My question and observation goes to the second presenter. How do we see the issue of land degradation, population growth, and then the prospect of intensive agriculture. In other words, how do we see the role that intensification of agriculture will play, despite the fact that we have a very large problem or a very big problem of land degradation and population growth in Africa? Then I'm glad you brought up the Lake Chad map. You know, we from geography were contesting that map. I think there is a problem. The map shows that in 2007, there is no water in Lake Chad on the Nigerian side, and that is not correct. There is water on the Nigerian side. So we need to review that map and see what is happening, what is wrong with that. Then the last issue, again to the second presenter, is the issue of the population. He said 1.3 billion population for Africa. He said UN estimate. Which arm of the UN and which year? You didn't tell us which year that estimate was made by the United Nations and which arm of the United Nations actually estimated the 1.3 billion people for Africa. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Olivier Manegat from GFA at WAHO, West African Health Organization. My question is to Dr. Darfa. You mentioned solar system. I'm very happy that the government of Nigeria is taking that very seriously. I'm happy to say that with our project, PowerLab, we will also equip 3 laboratories in Nigeria with solar systems, not only because it gives them autonomy, but also because it stabilizes the current and allows them to function properly with the testing. My question is rather with the problem of flooding that was raised during both presentations and waste management, especially also the biomedical waste management. So obviously when you have floodings, I remember the picture that was shown by Professor Abayomi yesterday. When you have floodings, it spreads waste a bit everywhere in the city, and also biomedical waste. So I'm wondering what is the policy of the government around waste management, and also particularly biomedical waste management. Thank you very much.
Sorry, so my question is really directed at the first speaker, and I must say that, I mean, the hardest part for me when I am thinking about this topic is that what exactly does it mean for me as a researcher? And so I saw there was a slide on a lot of high-level policies that have been produced around climate change. And I just wonder, when we're looking at all the data that is being produced, and we even saw yesterday maps that were produced of the Chad region, is there something in those policies that directs the individual to think through carefully how they are capturing data? So if I wanting to go to the Chad region, do I have to actually go and look for my colleague who presented yesterday and try and retrieve some of that data? Or do we have a policy statement that even comes out of a forum like this that puts the onus on individuals to carefully think through how they are capturing data so that we can leverage that quickly and rapidly? And so, yeah, so my question is around the policies that are currently out there and how they impact the individual.
Thank you very much. My question is to the Director of the Department of Climate Change. And I want to thank you for your presentation, which I sensed that there was some urgency and seriousness in the data that you presented. climate change is upon the whole world because of global use of greenhouse or global production of greenhouse gases, which are not necessarily derived from Africa. In fact, Africa is the least of the culprits. So there's nothing much we can do in Africa in terms of the trend towards warming of the planet, other than appeal to our more developed counterparts in other countries to slow down their emission. But we are particularly vulnerable to greenhouse gas and climate change in Africa, and yet we are not the perpetuators. However, what compounds climate change is environmental degradation. And that, together with climate change, equates to disaster for us in Africa. And we're beginning to see very clearly the consequences of the combination of climate change and environmental degradation. Now, if anybody cannot put two and two together and see that climate change is causing loss of livelihood, which is resulting in conflict, which is resulting in instability and loss of peace around the equatorial aspects of Africa, then nobody is watching the news. One thing that I have observed personally, and I'm not relying on data from anywhere, I am an environmentalogist and I conserve forests. Nigeria's depletion of our forest biome is accelerating so fast that the complete landscape of the country is changing by the year. What I would like to know is, inside all those very detailed policies that your department and other ministries have promulgated, how are those policies manifesting and cascading to result in tangible reversal of the deforestation that is going on, with unregulated deforestation in Nigeria? We talk about the green belt, but the green belt is not going to do anything if there is just unregulated deforestation going on across the country of Nigeria and across West Africa. This, to me, is one of the single most issues that we're facing in Nigeria and across the West African region. Thank you.
Thank you very much to both of the presenters. My first question actually goes to the second presenter. So you mentioned drivers of conflict in Africa, and the drivers you mentioned are basically contextual drivers. But again, if we look at the situation very critically, we would realize that there are quite a number of individual drivers that actually play a huge role in causing conflicts in Africa. So I would like to know how you came about the drivers that you presented, and why you left out some other factors that should be reflected there. And then to the first presenter, thank you very much for the presentation. I have a couple of questions actually. So we know that in 2018 there've been several high-level meetings regarding the Lake Chad region, but amongst the things that you presented here, we actually didn't see what specific thing the Nigerian government is doing to alleviate suffering among Nigerians that are living along the Lake Chad, because several of the reports that are coming out are saying because of the shrinkage of the water, it's affecting agricultural life. Most people around there actually depend on fishing, and if there is no water, of course, there is no fish. So what specific interventions is your department actually doing in those areas to alleviate immediate economic impact of that. And then secondly, you talked about solar system, and of course we all know that it's 2019. Everybody knows the way solar could actually contribute. But the main thing that prevents people from using solar in Nigeria is actually the cost. And if you have a department like that, I think that your department could work with manufacturers of this solar infrastructure to make it more accessible to people. Because if we have a substantial number of the population actually using solar energy, they could actually contribute to the national grid, and it has multiplier effects. And then thirdly, it's about the level of collaboration between your department and the health sector. Because you presented on climate change and conflict, and you mentioned that it could actually affect health infrastructure. But do you have specific investments from your department now to actually help our health system become more resilient? Because, of course, the Ministry of Health cannot do this alone. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. My questions goes to Dr. Yerima Tafa. During the presentation, you said something about government efforts made so far in tackling climate change. So my question is, what are the measures that the government has put in place to monitor the impact of the efforts on this climate change so far, so that we can know how far we've gone, if efforts have been made? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity given to me. I just want to buttress the first presenter, Dr. Tafa. And my buttress is more or less answering the question of the last question so far. It's on the government efforts in tackling climate change in Nigeria. I want to humbly say that one of the efforts Nigeria has put in place, which is West African Science Service Center on Climate Change and Adapted Land Use, that I am one of the graduates of the school. Not only that, there are two centers, like the presenter earlier mentioned, that there are two centers in Nigeria. Nigerians as well in this same program go to other West African countries. For example, I was in the Université de Lomé in Togo, where my own domain was on climate change and human security. But what we do at the end of our program is each and every one of us goes back to our country to carry out research. I worked on a wetland where I came up with a policy after my research, and these policies are given to the government. So the government from there, they can decide to, make some developmental moves on that. So I think these are some of the efforts, and I can boldly say that I am one of the beneficiaries. Thank you so much.
So now we have the questions. We have all the questions. Joshua, bring the microphone. Okay. Give it to Dr. Tafa.
I should come up.
Because that's going to be like another round. Have so many questions to respond to.
Yes. So thank you very much for the round of questions. Basically what I perceive from what is happening here is that there's need for enhanced visibility and continuous interactions to create an opportunity for us to keep on understanding the role and entry points for various stakeholders in what we are doing as a national government. But you should take into account that issues of climate change is cross-cutting. It is not the responsibility of only one sector. Every sector is contributing in one way or the other to tackling the issues of climate change. For instance, I did mention that we have a document known as the Nationally Determined Contribution, which is basically the blueprint or the roadmap for national action in tackling climate change in Nigeria. That document looked at 5 priority sectors. When we were preparing the so-called intended nationally determined contribution that informed the development of the Paris Agreement, for Nigeria, we looked at 5 sectors, which were the major emitters of greenhouse gases. They are not in any order, but agriculture is majorly number 1. Why is it number 1? We have heard from the presentations and from all that down the line, Nigeria is going to be the 3rd largest or most populated country on earth. How do you feed this teeming population? How do you move them about? How do you shelter them? This all leads to a lot of consequences on emissions of greenhouse gases. Do we continue business as usual in the agricultural practices that our grandfathers have been doing, and most of us are still doing it now? Or we should transit to a low carbon trajectory development pathway through the climate smart agriculture? What kind of buildings should we have that will not need too much energy consumption that will lead to emissions of greenhouse gases? We need climate smart buildings, green buildings, such that, and also in the area of land management, our structures now will have to start going vertically up rather than spreading them the way we do presently. These are all approaches to reducing emissions of greenhouse gases. Specifically on this problem of flooding and waste management, I'm glad to hear the effort or what you are bringing onto the table because it is, like I said, it's not only, you should not just sit down and be looking at the Ministry of Environment, that they have that responsibility, so they should go about to tackle the climate change problem as a whole. What we do as a ministry is that we are the focal point, so we create the enabling environment for every other sector to come into it, like the policy. Like we go to the ministries, we have succeeded now in establishing climate change decks in all the 36 states of the federations, in the ministries of environment. They also, at their jurisdiction, they are to take some concrete climate actions. One key thing that I will want to say in this aspect of flooding and waste and the policy around waste management itself is to say that the 3 R's, reuse, recycled, and recovered or something. So these are the guiding principles that the Ministry of Environment is using in coming up with a policy. There's already a policy presently that is handled by our Department of Pollution and Environmental Health. They have a policy on waste management. And through this policy, they are gradually introducing elimination of some certain kind of waste, like plastics. They are also helping small and medium-scale enterprises to establish recycling plants. There are businesses now that a lot of our youth are into in producing briquettes and pellets from all this waste. So, and we are also imbibing the new phenomena that is known as circular economy. That is, what you consider as a waste is actually a raw material to another sector. Government is seriously looking into that aspect, and it has already established a committee that is working around that aspect of a circular economy. So there are policies on waste, and also there are a lot of research and activities going on all across. Like I did mention to you, the EU are also having a project which presently is open for major consultants and contractors all over the world. They are already bidding, and in the EU headquarters they are reviewing it. They want to see how they can majorly come up to clean up the waste in Kano and in Ogun State. We are also working hand in hand with the UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, on the aspect of using Lagos State to generate hydrogen gas. It's one of the aspects that is called hydrogen economy. There's a lot of research going on across Europe in mobility. Vehicles now that will be using hydrogen for mobility rather than using the fuel that we are all using now. And they need to quantify to know what quantum of waste do you really have in Lagos. So a study presently is going on with this study known as C40. That is 40 cities all over the world, and Lagos has been selected as one of them. We are trying to see that waste that we see all over should now serve as a resource for generating hydrogen that will be used to power our vehicles and even industries. And also, from the circular economy aspect, we are using it to generate manure so that we don't use to have to use some chemicals in aspect of fertilizer. So it is a good aspect that is being done. Do we have policy statement on the climate change and its accessibility from your own questions? The department, like I said, we have an interministerial committee on climate change. We have a policy on climate change. But by and large, every sector has a statement in its policy that talked about their own activity and how it relates to aspects of sustainable development and environmental degradation as a whole. We have been having discussion with Oxfam. You all know Oxfam. So Oxfam now, what we are going to produce with Oxfam is a one-stop shop whereby at the press of a button, you'll be able to know what activities are going on in the area of adaptation, what activities are going on in the area of mitigation, what of aspect of technology transfer, who is doing this, who is doing that across the country, so that it will save you the effort of starting going to the last presenter to try to get a lot of information from there. You will get it just at the press of button. And it's going to be hyperlinked to our website, which is www.climatechange.gov.ng. So, as we all know, climate change is a new phenomena that is just evolving, though it has spent some number of years, but still, it is a learning curve for a lot of individuals, even to our policymakers, to our budgetary entity. in one of my slides, I did say that one of the achievements of government is moving towards greening our budget. To green the Nigerian budget, even within the Ministry of Environment itself, when Amina Mohammed was the minister before she went to be the UN Secretary General, she called all the departments and said, look, you have to justify each of your projects to show that it is contributing to meeting emission reduction. Many of them were lost. So this is even the ministry that is responsible for that. What of other ministries that are outside? If you tell them to green their budget. But it's a gradual thing that now a lot of sensitization, a lot of knowledge building, and a lot of directives also coming from the Federal Executive Council for implementation across the economy. Your question, you did say that either you or someone from the, you did say that we are not really responsible for climate change, which is a fact, but we are being impacted the most. And that the responsibility for tackling this should not really be much of a burden on us. But I will want to say that, yes, your statements are facts, but we are all part and parcel of the global community. And therefore, we have gotten a pathway to develop sustainably so that we will reduce our emission levels as we continue to develop. Bear in mind that we will be the third biggest population down the line. So if we don't imbibe the movement towards a low carbon trajectory, what will be the impact down this thing? We will eventually be the major contributors of greenhouse gases to the whole world, apart from finding a solution to solve it. So we need to do that. How are our various, there's decrease in forest cover, yes, is very true, but one of the efforts government is doing is establishing all these entities or outlets within the states. And we have already asked the states to give us their climate profile. If you look at Lagos State now, and you compare it to Rivers or to Borno State or Sokoto State, basically, they don't have the same climate profile. Rivers, Lagos, may be concerned more on sea level rise, while the north might be may be more concerned with desertification and forest cover. Now, if they know that, we now ask them to also develop what we call their vulnerability mapping, which they have done and submitted back to us. The next thing we have asked them to do now is an implementation plan. So it is an opening for even our experts to really interface with them. Many of them said part of their solution will be planting trees. And we are targeting that all over the country, each state might end up planting, let's say, 1 million trees. If you quantify that with the 36 states, we are talking of 36 million trees. We have increased the vegetational cover of the country. It is not all that will survive, but by and large. And also under our green bonds, afforestation is one of the projects that was undertaken under the first and second issuance. And a lot of them too are now also coming into the third series of the green bonds issuance. So by and large, there's a lot, but like I said, it's a cross-cutting issue that government, the focal point should take a lead to give a policy direction and to give a way for others to key into and develop along that path. How are our various policies manifesting in this issue? I will tell you a typical example. We developed the National Adaptation Strategy and Plan of Action on Climate Change for Nigeria. That document was done through a multi-stakeholder approach. It was supported by the government of Canada through CEDA, and then it was executed by the Nigerian Environmental Study Action Team in Ibadan. The ministry mobilized all the various stakeholders, and we came up with a robust direction or actions that will be done to help sectors to adapt to the impact of climate change. That document now, if we have representative from Ministry of Agri here, they developed their agricultural resilience framework, drawing from that NASPA, that National Adaptation Strategy and Plan of Action. The same thing, the Ministry of Health too, drew their actions, the vulnerability and adaptation document, which I don't know whether it has been finalized now, but they drew a lot of inspiration from the NASPA document. So you see there's a synergy among these entities. We also have a document which we produce on the impact of climate change on the water sector in Nigeria, which now the Ministry of Water Resources is also drawing from it. We have worked closely with the Ministry of Budget and National Planning on mainstreaming climate change into national development plans and up to the state levels too. So we have gone around the 6 geopolitical zones, sensitized the Ministry of Budget as well as their planning officers on how to integrate aspects of climate change into their developmental plan. And many of them are now doing whatever they are doing, they factor in this aspect. Few more questions. That there has been several high-level activities on the leg chart. What are the measures that have been enumerated to help the communities staying around that place? One major thing I learned from my principals, I kept on talking about Amina Mohammed. She said, look, Dr. Tarfa, this issue of climate change, since it is cross-cutting, it is not your responsibility to go out to really do the work on the ground. But what you are to do is to create the enabling environment, the policy direction, so that others can key into it. Government has established the presidential initiative on the Northeast. If you see what they are doing there, what they are doing is to enhance livelihoods of the people staying around the leg chart. But we are part and parcel of that committee or that group. We are injecting aspects of climate change into all the actions they are taking in that area. Introduction of clean cook stoves to the people in the IDPs. Introduction of hybrid solar systems in some of the communities there. Provision of water. You know, since the leg chart itself is drying up, I agree that by 2017 or 2007, there was still water in our site of the leg chart. It's not that it was totally dried up. But what instrument was used in taking that picture? Also, what is the resolution of that? Probably it has to reach a certain size before it can capture it as a dot. So I'm not answering it for him, but I'm just saying that that is probably a possibility. So these are the kind of interventions that are being done around that place. There's a lot of advocacy too that we are doing with the people. There are a lot of integrated land management activities that are being done there. And Mr. President, too, in every fora he has gone to, he has been talking about global cooperation and partnership to recharge the Lake Chad. It's a huge, from the estimate after the 2017 international conference that was held here in Abuja, it was quantified that we will need probably minimum of $50 billion to work on that. Who among the member countries of the Lake Chad Basin will be able to cough out that money? So it calls for international support, international cooperation, because the benefit is not only for Nigeria, it's a global benefit. If you stabilize that place, you are stabilizing 40 million inhabitants that are dependent on that. You will enhance agricultural activities. You will tempt the uprising. You will tempt massive migration that are moving all over, forceful even. Not just massive, but it's a forceful migration of people out of that place. But for you to go to Bangi River and start channelizing to bring water down to the Lake Chad, it calls for a lot of engineering design. It calls for a lot of political negotiations. What will you give that country for them to agree that this water they should release their water? There must be something that they will also benefit from it. And it's going to pass through several countries before it gets down to this place. And so discussions is still going on, and it's one of the topical issues that we always have side events when we go for international fora. And we always reflect it in Mr. President's statement because it's a very topical issue for him to stabilize that place, which will bring about stabilization. During the conference, we called representative from Egypt that came and made a presentation on how they were able to recharge or to utilize the Nile River. He said when they know that the survival of Egypt is dependent on the Nile River, they called for citizens that were in diaspora to contribute some resources. He told us within 1 week, they were able to generate all the money they needed to tackle that problem in that area. We have many Nigerians that are in diaspora, but do we have the political will and the cohesion for us to be able to willingly and voluntarily contribute into a certain fund for us to recharge the Lake Chad? So this is an issue. I'm taking advantage because you gave me only 20 minutes for the presentation, but I'm almost through. So the solar energy, what measures to reduce cost? It's a market-based thing, but we all know that the efficiency has kept on improving. A lot of research are going on all over the world, and the batteries that are the major, the most expensive component of the whole thing are gradually, the prices are gradually coming down. The thing is, government can also introduce like a microeconomic policy whereby if you aggregate yourselves and you are able to install solars maybe in big organizations like this. Take for instance now, if a policy comes out to say all the hotels in Abuja, 40% of their energy consumption should come from solar. Certainly, it's a challenge to the engineers to come and retrofit the whole of this industry, this place. They may decide not to have this kind of roof again. It might be slightly open so that there will be illumination. And also, they may not need ACs. They will open up in such a way that aeration can come in, you will not need much of this. So it is policy statement, doable, principal challenges that government will need to put on ground. Level of investment with the health sector, we have been doing a lot with the health sector, like I said. They are part and parcel of the interministerial committee. I told you they are bringing some projects now in series 3 of the green bonds, and it's open. Any individual here that is an expert, I've also said, come and register on the roster of experts of the IPCC. So these are all areas where gradually the vision will be increased and enhanced. Monitoring and evaluation to monitor the impact of the actions government is doing. You have heard one individual has told you the benefits that is derivable from the government policies in this. The climate smart agriculture now, which Ministry of Agric is doing, what is pushing them to do that? It is issues of climate change. Transportation sector, moving to rail and efficient buses is because of climate change. What of in the industries? A lot of retrofitting is going on in the industries. Dangote is the lead. If you go to Abajana, you will see what he's doing now to reduce emissions from the industrial sector. All these are because of climate change. We have what we call the MRV, which it is the UNFCCC that asks every country to do, the monitoring, reporting, and verification framework. And for Nigeria, we already have that. So we are capturing every activity and putting it inside that document, because we are also supposed to report to the international community on the MRV. I think if I've omitted any other one, we can discuss it bilaterally. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm sure that you enjoyed the opportunity that the questions generated by your presentation presented for you to have an additional 30 minutes for your presentation. Okay. Yes. 2 minutes. You had, yes, just one question now. And then in addition, you asked the question about the solar. You know, I think that one other issue, one other challenge is the import duties. That's why the solar manufacturers, because I also do some work in the area of renewable energy, that's why it's so expensive. It's out of the reach of everybody. And then the people in that sector, they are trying to, they've been working with the government to try and see how they can reduce the import duties. Because before we can begin to manufacture our own solar, it will take some time. But then there are parts that we need to bring from outside Nigeria. But then the duties are huge. So that's one issue that you should raise when you have the opportunity. 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. Before I go to my question, let me just talk about the solar panel issues. See, as a continent, or countries within the continent, one of the things that we should start taking serious when we go for negotiations is technology transfer. Because it's not just about Europe give me money, America give me money. But the best way to address those issues is know how to do these things. We have a lot of engineers, young men that can learn so much. And it would be better for the continent for us to have those industries here than importing most of these things. My question is on land degradation and population. How does it affect agriculture? The truth is that we can't continue agriculture the way we've been doing on the continent, because the population is growing at an alarming rate and degradation is increasing at an alarming rate. And that's why we have to start considering what Dr. Tafa said, climate smart agriculture. Climate smart agriculture is any form of agriculture that enhances adaptation to climate change, increase production, reduce mitigation. And there are a lot of different forms of climate smart agriculture. You don't even have to have land to do agriculture in modern day agriculture. There's something we call vertical agriculture, where you can produce year in, year out in your building, and you produce good, not genetic agriculture, as in good, clean food that can feed a lot of people. So gone are those days. We have hydroponics, we have vertical agriculture, we have vermiculture, we have different kinds of things you can do now to enhance agricultural production on the continent. So the days of cultivating so many lands and producing extremely little, those days are going. And we have to start imbibing these things. Somebody said something about population in Africa. Where did I get my figure? There's this new report, UN population report. It's on the internet, you can get it from there. I think that's all.
You actually spent less than 2 minutes. Okay. So thank you so much. Please let's put our hands together one more time for the two presenters. We'll move to the third one. We are not doing so well with time today. I think we can do better. So please let's stick to our time. And then when we want to make our interventions, please make them short and sharp. Okay. Dr. Michaela Mayofa, did I pronounce it well? Okay. She serves as BBMRI ERIC's Chief Coordination and Policy Officer, managing the Common Service ELSI, leading ELSI work packages in several H2020 projects such as Adopt BBMRI, ERIC, COBEL, USC Live, and coordinates the GDPR Code of Conduct for Health Research Initiative. She had earned a PhD from both the École des Hautes Études, the Sciences Sociales, and the University of Vienna, shortlisted by the Austrian Society for Political Science for Best Thesis in 2010. Throughout her academic career, she was a fellow in renowned research institutions in Belgium, United Kingdom, France, and Switzerland. She's a steering committee member of the Europe Biobank Week for 2019. I present to you Dr. Michaela Mayofa. 20 minutes.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction and the invitation of being here. And I want to exemplify my excitement of being here with coming back to one of the last slides. The image that showed the beautiful woman and the witch. And it is intriguing for me because I first learned about this image in school. And I realized today, once you have seen both images, once you're aware of it, you cannot unsee it. And that is the same thing, the same truth actually with knowledge. And exchanging knowledge, that's why we're here. And I'm especially grateful for the comment on gender equality. Not because I'm a woman, but because I'm a human being, I'm an incurable funny bone, and I'm Austrian, and I will come back to that in my last slide of the presentation. Now, the discussion and the comment on what it means in this context here, I would have completely missed out with, when I would not have come to this conference. And with that, whatever we are doing, policy is important, infrastructures, what I will largely talk about, are important, scientific research on the ground is important, but a lot of work is done in relationships, in a dialogue, and that is something we always have to come back with, or back to. I start here with presenting the ESRI roadmap that is put together by the European Strategy Forum on Research Infrastructures and is a strategic instrument to highlight what scientific integration is needed in Europe. Where are research infrastructures a good idea, basically? The S3 group also encourages member countries to set up their national roadmaps, building on whatever the national strengths are, and bring this knowledge then together to the S3 roadmap. So you have the interaction between Europe and the member states, and of course within the member states, between the regions and researchers. So as you can imagine, bringing this all together is a very fast-moving train, very easily done. Taking a step forward is looking at the definition of what research infrastructures are. Research infrastructures are facilities that provide resources, services for research communities to conduct research and foster innovation. Now, 13 of the biomedical research infrastructure, all of them on this S3 roadmap, have then come together and joined in the COBALT project that only is there to enable the research infrastructures to streamline their mutual policies, streamline their mutual interests, again, enter in a dialogue with one another. I've highlighted on the slide biobanking and biomolecular resources, and I should also pinpoint, as it is interesting for you, the highly pathogenic microorganisms, that is the research infrastructure of Arinia, led by France. Now, quickly, the history of the research infrastructure that I represent, BBMRI. It is quite a mouthful. With this acronym, you immediately see that it came out of a European project. After it was put as an idea on this S3 roadmap, in the European project called BBMRI Preparatory Phase, items were put together and a business plan was developed by researchers. What do we need and how can we do it? After the project ended, it took another 3 years, but the funders, largely representatives from the Ministry of Health and Research, sometimes education as well, in finding the answers to 2 questions. How do we fund it? And how do we make it sustainable? So again, very easy questions and a very fast development if you look from it from the policy perspective, because these things, especially when it brings various multiple countries, multiple sectors together, takes time. Now in 2013 until today, we are in BBMRI in the implementation phase, and the question is what we are doing. We are essentially facilitating biobanks, exchange expertise and tools, build up where tools are missing. And this is where we are, or who we are today. BBMRI represents 21 member countries, and in each of the member countries we have established a national node that in the different national flavors brings together a network of the national biobanks resources, has a national catalog, has different strengths. And I want to pick out Malta here. Malta has a very strong biobank on rare diseases. Now, what we offer as BBMRI, BBMRI is the headquarter that I represent. BBMRI is these national nodes in the 21 member countries, is guidance on ethical, legal and societal issues, which in short is ELSI, IT tools and expertise, and quality management and services. For the sake of time, I will now go briefly through the slides, but if you have any questions afterwards, please do not hesitate to contact me. Now, for the IT infrastructure, the basic idea is always whatever is going on, the local biobank has their system in place, which should be interconnectable with the national catalog, which should then be interconnectable with the European catalog, and all of this given that the central authentication authorization is appropriately in place, that data protection rules, which are very big in Europe today, are followed, and wherever possible, linkages to medical health records are given. This resulted that the BBMRI directory today, which puts the biobanks on the map, has more than 700 biobanks on the map. We estimate about 1 million samples and associated data. Now, what you see, and that ties again with the previous presentations, although the topic is completely different, it shows the power of the map. It shows what can be done. And this we exemplified within a research project with the colon cancer cohort, where we pulled from our various member states a specific case and put it together, using it as an example, what things are working, where are the pitfalls. Again, to pick for the sake of time just one example, drawing data transfer agreements between the biobanks, because the access policy is always the local one, takes time. It involves legal departments, it involves researchers, and it has, in this sense, not been done before. And by coincidence, we started the initiative when the GDPR just entered into force. So there was a lot of uncertainty how it was done, but it showcases also what can be done. All these biobanks that we have in our network commit to our partner charter. The partner charter and how it is signed is depending on how the national nodes decided to implement it. However, I want to pick one aspect of the partner charter that relates to quality, because it helps that all the partners on a policy level commit to the applicable European and international standards. We use the OECD best practice guidelines, the WHO IARC guidelines for common minimum technical standards, and require that standard operating procedures are developed, are shared, and ultimately commit to harmonization. Sorry about that. In this endeavor, we rely heavily on the ISO and SEN standards, so that the commitment that can be made is reached. And in order to ensure that the standards are also useful for the community, BBMRI has the status of an international organization and can be an observer to the ISO committees, which allows us in return, whatever standards are in development where we are have representatives in the working groups, can feed back the information, which then trickles down again to the local biobanks and experts to comment if it is useful. As a next step, with the implementation of the ISO standards, also as they are expensive, we do not force, cannot and want not our members to implement them, but we encourage them to seek out the self-assessment survey on quality, as quality heavily matters. And this survey allows you whether it would make sense for your own biobank to go in the direction in getting the ISO certification, if this is what you choose for, or to prove through the self-assessment, well, actually, we do not have the official certification, but we are following largely the rules. And again, this is flagged in our directory. Now trying to find the right way. Yeah, here we are. It seems I'm a bit too energetic today, but probably because I come to the topic that is close to my heart, that is ethical, legal, and societal issues. And here we have a service in the respective, in BBMRI ERIC, that supports the biobanking community. Again, it seems I'm a bit too energetic today, but probably because I come to the practices and wherever useful, influencing policies. Again, to pick an example, when the GDPR was in the making, we had a task force on the GDPR with representatives from various member countries that allowed us to issue a policy paper to lobby in the European Parliament as well as at the Commission and in the public in saying these are the important strands coming from the various countries. How do we work? This is true for ELSI as well as BBMRI in general. We are a federated research infrastructure. We have a federated model, and in the network of ELSI legal experts, we employ a network from academia as well as from various services and tackle the questions as we come along. One recent activity that we had in April this year was some national nodes have specific ELSI help desks, some on biobanking, some on medical research at large, and we were bringing them together for the first time in understanding, again, how are these specific services functioning, working, what are the key topics, and to identify what BBMRI can do. And one of the things is first, to promote that it is there, because it happened quite frequently that a researcher contacted BBMRI Eric thinking we would help, and we could, but the help we could give was not the expertise the researcher per se wanted, but to pinpoint to the right person in the home country in saying, well, we actually already have something. As we know, a lot of such initiatives are working at the level of research projects, and therefore it is often lost, the communication is lost, and this is something that BBMRI Eric can avoid in making whatever is the outcome of a research project, content-wise or as a contact, to keep the connection, to keep it alive, and to guarantee with that sustainability. I started my presentation with this, and I will glide to an end with the comment that it is only a dialogue between the policy level, between the researchers, between the various stakeholders that are engaging, between experts, in our case nodes and headquarters, funders and policymakers, and I should also mention with the general population to identify what the priorities are and how to tackle them. For the ELSI unit, this means that we are now dividing in research services and training, and the services will stay on in a help desk format. Some of them are the outcomes of research projects, some of them are initiatives that we as headquarters take. So one of them is the necessity, for instance, in European projects, is to have an ethics review. The ethics reviews are sometimes rather complicated, and there's no mutual recognition, sometimes not even within one country. Whereas in clinical trials, the procedures are relatively clear. In fields of biobanking, it can sometimes become complicated. And again, we do a mapping exercise. Who are the go-to persons in the country? What are the regulations? Whom do I have to talk to understand it? And how can we transfer this knowledge? Ultimately, training has become a much bigger aspect of it. And as a colleague of mine loves to say it, let's go for the low-hanging fruit. We all work with limited time, with limited resources, but we want to get the most out of it. And the easiest way for us is webinars. And I would encourage you, if you have topics that you would like BBMRI to tackle, please let me know and I will see how we can accommodate it, whether it is ELSI, quality, or IT. Lastly, I want to keep my promise in talking why I mentioned that I'm Austrian. I guess most of you know the movie Sound of Music. It plays in Austria, it portrays the aspect, the story of the Trapp family, and everybody assumes that I've seen this movie because I'm Austrian. do not do that. This movie is not shown, or when I was a kid, was not shown in Austrian television. Now you can make, I think since 3 years or so, a tour in Salzburg, which has been established for American tourists. And to date, I've never seen this movie. The first time I heard about it was when I was 19. I was visiting in the US, and after the first mix-up with Australia, I said, oh yeah, Sound of Music, and I thought, what? I have literally no idea. Now, what do I want to convey with this example? Whatever we are doing, we need to take a step back and take nothing for granted. Also not that anyone else knows what we are talking about. And it's absolutely okay to ask, and especially as we are researchers, we know that there are no stupid questions. And with this, I would like to conclude my presentation. Thank you.
What a woman cannot do cannot be done. We said 20 minutes, she spent 18. Emin, please put your hands together one more time for her, for keeping to time. Okay, so thank you so much for sharing your work at BBMRI with us, and we'll take the questions. I think, do you have questions for her? Any areas of collaboration, possibilities, opportunities that we see, the issues raised, the challenges?
Thank you, Joshua. Thank you very much, Michaela. That was really interesting. My question is, how can you ensure that your data are always anonymized? And the database can be used and are mostly used, I think, by the private sector in European countries. And they are forced also, I think, legally to share their data, and it's like a bit new. I think it's like from a few years ago. And my understanding is that the public sector is a bit not good at doing that. So do you have ways of finding incentives to help the public sector to also use these databases more than what is done by the public sector? And then pending to this question is also we have many platforms that are starting now in West Africa. We have the HIS2 that is mostly used by many countries, but now we have also SORMAS, and new platforms are being developed. And there's, I mean, my worry is that there might be too many platforms. And what do you plan to do to help? Do you have some objectives that where you could help to kind of manage this? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I just want to ask, because I'm interested in biobanking, but from the viewpoint of pathogens. I could see that most of your activities with regards to human sample biobanking is revolving around DNAs, ecologies, and all of that. Do you have any activity revolving around supporting biobanking in the area of pathogens, and any in-country activities generally that is in Nigeria so far? Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for your presentation. My question is likely to the last question that was asked. Please, what are you doing in supporting or any collaboration of BBMRI with these new upcoming biobanks in Africa or West Africa? What are you doing to assist them so that they can have a better network as well as what you have in Europe? Thank you.
Well, thank you for all those questions. I think I start with pathogens and Africa in general, as I cannot answer for Nigeria specifically. What I can say is that the directory does not only contain colon cancer studies. That was just an example I picked. It is various pathologies that are in there coming from either population-based biobanks or clinical biobanks in Europe within our member countries. Now, some of them have pathogen host samples there, but only rarely, especially when it comes from a pathological archive in the clinical setting. So the sample size there, in most cases that I am aware of, and I would need to check our database to be absolutely sure, is maybe a handful samples in one of the biobanks. What is more of interest for you are the activities of a sister research infrastructure, ARINIA, that pulls together, especially for the pathogen host interactions, the sample collections. And why they are interested in collaborating with us is, again, our experience in biobanking, in quality management. Because the aspects that they obviously are, or what we can learn from them, are the security aspects. I encourage you all to go to our public website to check out the directory, and I will share with you also a link, because recently we had had set up a webinar in how to use our directory and find the data that you're looking for. And if you have additional questions, I'll provide a contact as well that can help. Now, the tricky part on a general statement, I think, is that Europe as a whole, and that is my humble personal opinion, not the opinion of the organization, is doing still far too little in collaborating truly with African countries. I had thankfully the chance in doing so within the research project of B3 Africa, and that explains why BBMRI also got interested in it, and the project has ended. However, we committed in keeping the ties in order not to lose the momentum and to wait for the next projects to continue with it. What were the concrete outcomes of this project? Again, to pick one example, the Gambia was a participant of this project, and my colleagues from IT were there on site and helped to co-develop the LIMS system and gave advice in how, given the situation that is needed there, to make the knowledge transfer to the Gambian colleagues. And obviously, they had learned a lot with the limited resources that the colleagues had there in using it back. Another aspect of that project that was developed was the concept of biobank in a box, where from the various consortium partners, And Baobab Limbs is also one tool, was put together and is freely available. And we commit to keep this alive and open source accessible. And that ties back to your comment about open science. I think nobody yet knows what it means in practice, especially researchers, and also within research we still have to have the discussion that it means something completely different in a different context. Maybe to take a step back, I think it was less than a year ago, the European Commission committed in a high-level policy statement to open science. And for the biobanking sector and for the healthcare sector, this means something different than to physics, to CERN, or to social scientists. We are dealing with sensitive data, so the question is access, yes, for researchers, but access to authenticized users and how to ensure that. And this discussion is still ongoing and will be ongoing. And I do not, well, the only holy grail I believe in is the one of the Monty Pythons. Everyone who says has in these areas an easy solution, watch him with caution. And lastly, when looking at the platforms or the databases that we pull together, in most cases, we are not dealing with anonymous data. We are dealing with pseudonymized data, coded data, sometimes in the clinical setting, sometimes in the research setting. Now, how to ensure that they stay anonymous, the identity stays anonymous for the users, and for the public database that everybody can access is to work on a metadata level and to ensure that whatever is pushed into this BBMRI directory, which represents the meta database, is appropriately done. That said, in relation to the GDPR, as well as within the IT community, there are huge discussions what anonymization actually means, especially as we know that it cannot guarantee, or it's no longer a fixed concept. And our minds as well as our policies have to adapt to that. What was anonymous yesterday, even in the legal sense of the GDPR, which means that you under no circumstances ever can go back and to the identity of the data, is also true in, say, 5 years. Thank you.
Just more of a comment, and I think what it does raise, and we've had this discussion in various forums, is, and I think, and it's a question to us as researchers on the African continent, what stops us from coordinating ourselves into a system that allows us to manage our research infrastructure? We have seen slides, which is actually a nice presentation, around the ethical and legal and social concepts and how that has been formulated. We have a large amount of work happening in West Africa, East Africa, Southern Africa, and Northern Africa. And so the question is, where are the bodies or the organizations on the African continent that are prepared to coordinate? And maybe it has to be us then. But I think what we need is actually to have a voice that can speak on behalf of the researchers. Else we will continue to either build our separate systems, or we continue to not leverage what has been happening around the African continent. So I thank you for your presentation, but it does leave us with a lot to think about. Is each year we speak about how do we push the African continent forward. And again, it's a call to us to actually think through how do we best manage the resources that we have and actually speak with one voice, so that we're not just speaking as Sierra Leone, as South Africa, as Nigeria, but we start to manage our resources appropriately so that we can deal with the challenges we have.
Yeah, okay, I would like to answer to that if possible. because, okay, sorry. No, it's just that with WAHO, currently there's a Senegalese team that has developed a platform that could be used for tracking samples and saving results, and that is a beginning that has been approved to be used in West Africa in the future, and we are planning to pilot test that next year. So that could be a good start for a platform that has been built strictly by West African.
Well, it's not really a question, but to build on what my colleague here said with respect to networking and building capacities within the African sub-region. We have a model which I kept on referring to, the WASCAL model, the West African Science Service Center. It is something that I will want to challenge you to look at it and see how we can leverage this kind of partnership, since you have some success stories which you have shared, and then form a partnership too with key experts from across not only West Africa but across the whole of Africa. Certainly, I want to assure you that there are so many experts across, but it's just to interface so that the local experience here can be shared with the international, and then the international also interface with what we are doing at the local level. We can also take the advantage of the WASCAL to inject some research activities too, since they are training up to PhD is on climate change and adaptive land use, but we can broaden it to include aspect of health in it. It's a possibility. Thank you.
Thank you for this. Again, I would like to encourage you to contact me today after the session, but also by email. If I don't have the answer, I'm easily conveying it to one of my colleagues who does. And I was very much intrigued with the example of the IMI call that can easily be in the future also another opportunity, not only to look for Horizon 2020. And I'm an agnostic about those things, whatever works and whatever is a true collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you so much. But I'm still heartbroken. I'm heartbroken that you haven't seen The Sounds of Music. That was one of the reasons I went to Austria a long time ago. And I was so happy when I was, being taken around. This was where this was shot. This is. It was a delightful experience. So I recommend that to you. All right. So we'll move to the presentation by Dr. Melanie Joseph on Equator. Sorry, I don't have your biodata, so you please come up and introduce yourself so that they know the expertise being brought into the room. So you have 20 minutes.
Thank you very much. My name is Melanie Goesauf. Don't worry if you can't pronounce my last name. Nobody can actually. But luckily my parents gave me an easy first name. So my name is Melanie. Many thanks to the organizers for giving me the opportunity to do a kind of workshop setting here. So I will not talk so long. And I am a social scientist. I'm Austrian. I also never saw Sound of Music. And I just want to continue the confusing story of complicated abbreviations a little bit. So you already heard from Michaela what BBMR-ERIC is and what it's doing. I'm a research officer at BBMR-ERIC, and I'm working in one of these projects, kind of putting in practice what Michaela was describing before. And what I want to do today is to listen to you, especially. This is what social scientists do, especially working with qualitative methodologies. I'm not presenting already the answers, but just asking the questions. And so what I'm going to talk about is the Sinica project, especially the stakeholder engagement we are doing as social scientists in the field of ethical, legal, societal issues there, and a particular methodology we are doing, which is called Écouter, also an abbreviation for the methodology, but not by coincidence. It also means the French verb from to listen. And so let me quickly tell you what Sinica is all about. You can find all the details on the project's website. So Sinica stands for Common Infrastructure for National Cohorts in Europe, Canada and Africa. It's one of the project BBMRI ERIC is involved in within the Horizon 2020 program. And Sinica is an initiative to develop a federated cloud-enabled infrastructure, making population scale genomic and biomolecular data accessible across international borders to support research and also across continents. And this particular project creates one of the largest cross-continental implementations of human genetic and phenotypic data federation and interoperability with a focus on diseases, while respecting individual rights through privacy-respecting approaches. So this is where basically we are as BBMRI ERIC are contributing from the ELSI perspective. And so what we are doing, or what our role in this project is, to interact with stakeholders, to work on governance structures. So the main objective of our work in all that is to facilitate and to support the exchange of samples and data between the users, and while keeping with ethical and legal principles, and also taking a different social, societal, cultural context into account. So the study is basically an empirical investigation to identify all the important ethical, legal, and societal challenges, and to develop possible solutions for future collaborations, as well as to develop a health data governance framework, which is right from the beginning, from the starting point of the project itself. So we will develop recommendations on ethical and also legal aspects, and here we're collaborating with our French colleagues from INSERM, and to implement an appropriate data sharing flow between European, Canadian and African cohorts. That was very quickly about the project. You can find a full list of all the project partners and cohorts involved on the project website. And I want to introduce now a little bit the methodology which we are working with. It was developed by colleagues from Newcastle University. It's a very open methodology, and to engage with stakeholders, and by stakeholders we mean a very big group of all citizens, publics, researchers, participants in research more generally. And the methodology itself aims to considering all the ethical, legal and social questions, and involve all the stakeholders and what's important to them right at the beginning of the project. So Sinica started in January this year, and we also started there. So we are at the beginning of this process, and this methodology and our investigations will continue with the project. But for within this project is the first time here to do this exercise. So many thanks to the organizers for giving us the opportunity to do so. And to develop all the governance structures by all the smart people from IT and research and so on is also developing the platform. And we are going to engage with different kinds of knowledges from various stakeholders groups. And within this methodology, we think of governance as a co-production. So we're not offering something and ask you, agree you do you agree with that? But ask you first what is important for you. So there are no rights and wrongs and so ever, or right answers. Everything is important to us. As I said, I'm a social scientist. I'm open to everything which you see important for research. That could also be issues of collaboration, of communication, and so on. So basically, the methodology itself works in 4 steps. First one is engagement and knowledge exchange through mind mapping. As you may recognize in one of Michaela's slides, social scientists like to work with post-its or sticky notes, so you will get some from me later. In another step, we will do the analysis from all the contributions, so we bring all that together from today's event and the next ones in the future, then develop a concept out of that, so bring it to a next level of interpretation, and feed back the results and refine it, develop recommendations from all that. So the methodology itself just gives a starting point how to do that, but the methodology itself develops while we are doing it. So with this first event today, you're already setting the stage for the next events to come by telling us what is important, and we will kind of integrate it in the next steps. So, as I said, we are not here to already give you the answers, but to ask the question, which is, quite openly, what are the expectations, challenges, and potential solutions related to data generation, usage, and sharing? So when you think about from your role in research, for your participation in research, from your expertise, what do you see when you think about data generation, usage, and sharing as a challenge? What do you see as a solution? What do you expect? And basically that's from my side. All I want to do now is to walk around and give you some notes, and just write anything you want to say about, I'm expecting this and that. I see challenges here. These are the challenges I see. This could be solutions which I know or which I wish we should have. You can also put your wishes on there. It's very open. And for the sake of time, I will do that just later and ask you to just write everything which is important to you on a post-it note. And you can see the brown paper over there, which also says expectations, challenges, solutions. And while you are just going to lunch, just put it there. And we will have enough of this one, so if you don't have any idea right now, don't worry, this will be there the whole day. So just put it there when you think you are ready to do so. And we will then kind of try to summarize as much as we can for here, but time is really limited to start the actual analysis at the moment. So we'll find another way to feedback the results or the preliminary results. So, yeah, maybe, I don't know, I think we didn't discuss this with the organizers, but maybe the conference proceedings could be a good place to share the results with you. All right, so could you switch to the last slide? So here are also my contact details if you have questions and so on after this event, or new ideas and so on. Just send me an email. And yeah, as I said, we're very happy to be here today, and very thankful that, and we hope that you share your experience with us. And I will just walk around and give you the notes, but for the moment, that's all from my side. Thank you very much.
That was very fast. These women, they continue to amaze me. Please put your hands together one more time. It was so unexpected. You know, I expected her to go on for like another 10 minutes or so. And she was done. Thank you. So we'll move on to the next presentation. It's going to be by Professor Willem Ampofo. Okay, here it says Dr. Ampofo, which, how do I describe you? Prof, okay. Yeah, I got confused. Professor Ampofo's research interests include molecular and serological investigations of viruses, prevention of viral infections, antiviral therapy, and viral disease burden. Its career milestones include the laboratory discovery of the first Ghanaian case of HIV in 1986, the first isolation of wild-type poliovirus in Ghana, confirmation of first cases in 2007 of highly pathogenic avian influenza H5N1 virus in Ghanaian poultry, and the establishment of the National Influenza Center in Ghana in 2007. Recently, in 2011, he supervised the laboratory detection of the first ever cases of Lassa fever virus infection in humans and rodents in Ghana. In 2010, he was appointed a member of the WHO Strategic Advisory Group of Experts, Working Group for Influenza Vaccines and Immunization. And since October 2011, he's been one of 3 African region representatives serving on the WHO Pandemic Influenza Preparedness Advisory Group. In August 2012, he was appointed by WHO Director General to a new 2-year membership of the Global Action Plan Advisory Group for Influenza Vaccines. Professor Ampofo is also currently the American Society for Microbiology Ambassador for Ghana. Please put your hands together as we welcome him to tell us about the latest milestone in 20 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, the thing is here. So, I would rather you not had read the last part because I no longer represent the American Society for Microbiology. I'm a proud ambassador for the African Society for Laboratory Medicine. I need to update that bio that was used. So I'm here to talk to you not about viruses, but as you heard, I've been involved with vaccines, and I'm currently the chair of the African Vaccine Manufacturing Initiative. And we've struck a partnership with the GET Consortium. So I'm going to give you some updates about what we are trying to do in the efforts, the advocacy to promote vaccine manufacturing in Africa. So the outline of my talk will be about why vaccine manufacturing in Africa is vital, the efforts that we've made by the African Vaccine Manufacturing Initiative, 3 important products, and how the market is a critical part of trying to produce vaccines in Africa. I'll take you through the manufacturer's position paper, the regional economic forums that we are promoting, and finally we hope that there will be a ministerial conference on vaccine development and manufacturing in Africa. And a little brief about the recent workshop we had just 2 weeks ago to define a roadmap towards a vaccine manufacturing policy for Africa. This was done in partnership with the TIBA group, who are funded by the Wellcome Trust. So, advancing vaccine development and manufacturing in Africa. This initiative was grown from a group of individuals and agencies who were involved with an effort supported by the US Department of Health and Human Services to promote technology transfer for influenza vaccine in Africa. And goes back to 2010. And this map shows you some of the individuals where they come from in green on this map, who got together to form the African Vaccine Development Manufacturing Initiative. But the stark reality is that Africa produces less than 1% of its own vaccine needs, and we feel that we cannot allow this to continue. You heard about how with the Ebola outbreak in DRC currently ongoing, there is even a lack, there is a problem with the supply of the GSK, the Merck vaccine. So it just shows that we really need to ramp up efforts. But vaccine manufacturing is not a simple process. It is a complicated, multi-step process, and each step has to have specific equipment. There are specific skills required for a specific vaccine. So I work with viruses, and I can tell you it's very difficult to grow viruses because you have to eliminate the bacteria and the fungi, all those things. You have to have a clean environment. You need to reproduce this because vaccines are biologicals which are going to be used by humans. So you need to have good manufacturing practice. You need to have a complete process to grow the organism, inactivation, purify, blend the vaccine, fill, freeze drying. Then most critical is the packaging, distribution, storage, because they are very important to keep these vaccines viable. And of course, it's an industrial cycle, okay? So you can do bulk production. It takes up to about 12 months. And then throughout all this, you have to have quality control, quality assurance, and pharmacovigilance. So you find that at least about 70% is dedicated to quality control for this process. There's also a lot of research and development that is required. We know that it takes between almost 9 to 14 years to develop a vaccine, to register it, to get to WHO pre-qualification. And you probably require at least $30 to $100 million for this. So it's not a simple process when we talk about vaccine development and manufacturing in Africa. But, I mean, this I've talked about already, okay? And the issues are poor sustainability, vulnerability, poor emergency preparedness. We have weak national security, and of course, it's a poor socio-economic aspect as well. But it does also present, an opportunity for us, and we should look at the benefits that could accrue from actually embarking and pushing for vaccine manufacturing in Africa. So we know that by 2050, about 25% of the world's population will be in Africa. You heard from some of my colleagues that Nigeria has the largest population in Africa, and that's a large market if you're a businessman. So we also need to look at how these things will all come together. So from the AVMI, we've kind of put together, based on the knowledge that we've derived from recent activities, 3 activities that we think link the challenges, present the critical area of the skills and knowledge that we require, the funding, the technical support, access to technology, of course, the timelines. If you don't start now, 20 years down the line, you'll still be here where we are, 1% production. And of course, you can't do this without increasing regulatory authority capacity to be able to certify that the vaccines are of the required, standard and quality to be able to be used in humans. So we've actually done, from the side of the AVMI, 3 studies. One looking at vaccine manufacturing and procurement in Africa. These documents are available on our website, and I'll show you the website link at the end. We've also done a white paper on how the issues involved in establishing manufacturing capacity for human vaccines. And also we've looked at how, if you want to produce commercial vaccines, how you need to identify the potential market opportunities and conduct, assessments of the opportunities therein. So there is a strong relationship between manufacturing, procurement, and sustainability. I mean, I could give you a whole lecture on how Gavi and UNICEF control the vaccines that are used in Africa through, the relationship that the African governments have established because of their own inability to buy their own vaccines. I mean, that is a blanket statement. I think some of you in Nigeria would have heard that recently Gavi has extended Nigeria's graduation out of the, what do you call it, the supported system for 10 years. So that would, it's giving Nigeria more time to develop, its economic stability so that it will have enough money to be able to buy the vaccines at a higher cost directly from the manufacturers, if you understand what, the procurement mechanisms. So we did a study looking at how vaccine manufacturing related directly to procurement in Africa. We did a complete assessment of the manufacturing capacity and the procurement mechanisms that will be required to establish sustainable vaccine manufacturing in Africa. I mean, there's a comprehensive overview of the current situation, the main directions, the issues, the challenges, and the opportunities that are available on the continent. Okay, so basically the study looked at the market dynamics, the vaccine procurement and financing, how sustainable manufacturing could be established, and what kind of financing mechanisms were required. Because all four issues are interlinked: the market, the procurement, the manufacturing, and the financing and the funding. So you heard that I'm a scientist, I'm a virologist, I've been working with viruses, but now I've come to understand that to get vaccines for the viruses that I've been working with, you really need to have a clean grasp of all these four. So you need to talk to the Minister of Finance, Minister of Trade, Minister of Science and Technology, and the Minister of Health. You need to have them all on the same link in order to push forward with vaccine manufacturing or even any pharmaceutical enterprise. So it's not all doom and gloom. I mean, when we started, we found out that a couple of vaccine manufacturers in Africa. I mean, although we have less than 1%, we do have Senegal, which produces the yellow fever vaccine. It's actually one of the few vaccine producers for yellow fever globally. And the Institute Pasteur is currently enjoying, a big international grant is building a new factory to produce yellow fever vaccine. And those of you who are involved with such work know that there have been yellow fever outbreaks, even in Nigeria, and there has been a major issue about access to enough vaccine, and the WHO has even reduced the amount of antigen using a dose-sparing formula now to make enough vaccine available for the areas where the outbreaks are taking place. So these are real practical things that show you why vaccine manufacturing is really important. Then we also have Tunisia that does some serums. We have Egypt, Bacteria that does some serums. And then there have also been efforts in Ethiopia. And finally, I'll tell you the story about BioVac later on. So the key findings that we found was that, yes, there is a vaccine market in Africa. There's a booming demand. We have increased populations, immunization coverage. And also a lot of money is spent on procuring vaccines. The dominant mechanisms in Africa are controlled by UNICEF. 45 out of 54 countries use the UNICEF system. The various kinds of manufacturing technologies available, so it's heterogeneous, and you need to find which one is suitable for the product that you would like to make. And the cost, at least between 60 to 130 million. CapEx is about 30%, and there are new technologies, new models that have come online. I mean, this past year, earlier this year, I visited a facility in Belgium, which you could set up for about 10 to 15 million US dollars to make a polio vaccine. So the other thing that we saw, or the main conclusion from the study, was that there is a limited space for the multiple players in the vaccine production field in Ghana. We could look at, in Africa, sorry. So we could look at regional hubs, based on the regional economic fora, but it will require the right level of political support, a well-funded, coherent regional policy, approach, development or provision of the necessary ecosystem by the political authorities, because you need to have a viable, competitive, and sustainable, vaccine manufacturing approach. So this I'll skip to very quickly because it just shows how, vaccine manufacturing is complicated. So if you're looking to establish vaccine manufacturing, this is the ABC, level 100 stuff that you need to look at. And the target audience is critical. The governments are the ones who buy the vaccines. And the NGOs also support this effort. So you really need to engage with them right from the beginning. We've already talked about the high costs. Okay, human capital is a major issue. You won't find biotechnology for vaccine production as a course taught in any university. Most of the industries establish their own capacity building. So you'd have to invest a lot in human resource development for the specific industrial needs that you're going to do, and you need to achieve high GMP and maintain this all the time. Ministers and presidents change, and when they change, you have to start all over again to build the relationships for your product to ensure that procurement is in the right place. And then we also have WHO pre-qualification, which is a high barrier for any new company. When I say a high barrier, you cannot make a vaccine by just adapting any kind of technology. You have to meet the existing standards because these are very critical molecules for health, public health. So we did do a case study in partnership with UNIDO and WHO to look at what were the current situation analysis in Africa, and South Africa represented the case study. We looked at what the market needs were, what kind of vaccines could be manufactured, the type of facility, high volume versus low volume, and it did show that a person with knowledge of vaccine industry and basic market data could do, a high-level feasibility studies to see what vaccines could be introduced. Okay. Further down the line, a very recent thing that we've done, which I said happened 2 weeks ago, was that in a nutshell, we've seen that the background of all this products and data we have on Africa is meaningless if we do not have a coherent, comprehensive policy for vaccine manufacturing endorsed at the highest level by the African Union. So we got together in Cape Town, a group of policymakers, academia, global health agents, in partnership towards tackling infections in Africa, the AVMI. And we set out to develop a roadmap, that would support local vaccine development in Africa, and then discuss strategies, how we could integrate this policy into the African Union's model law and medical health technologies. The African Union has a new policy that spearheads pharmaceutical manufacturing in Africa, and we are hoping that vaccines could become, a significant activity within this new plan. And the African Union Development Agency, in partnership with NEPAD, is responsible for promoting this. So I thought I would summarize that, yes, there are compelling reasons for vaccine development and manufacturing, to have sustainable supplies, the African population growth, the burden of economic disease, novel manufacturing technologies. Sorry about that. Burden of epidemic-prone diseases, novel manufacturing technologies, and various initiatives at both the regional and global level. Does this thing keep jumping? So I shouldn't say that there are no policies in the region. There are policies, okay? We had declarations at the AU summit just in January 2017. We had key political activity following the Ebola outbreak in West Africa in 2015. So, and we've had a very successful rollout of the meningococcal vaccine in Africa. So we think that these policies that seek to keep universal access at the forefront to reduce child mortality, increase and sustain domestic investments, develop African research, sector, and build political will. All these things provide an enabling environment for what we are trying to do. So we think that the products that we have developed will enable us to educate and brief these policy makers. We can try and link it up with the emergency actions that have taken place for elimination of yellow fever and meningitis. And all countries have national immunization strategic plans and national emergency preparedness plans. So these form a good backdrop, to push forward with advocacy for vaccine manufacturing. So the roadmap that we have recently discussed seeks to come up with a comprehensive vaccine advocacy plan. We need a concept note that describes the vaccine development process. We think that we should do a lot more advocacy at various events, both events like this, and also at a regional and sub-regional level. I would like to invite as many of you as possible to become members of the AVMI. I will show you the website at the end, and please join up, because the louder and bigger our voices are, the more impact we'll make on the political leadership. Because we need to secure an AU resolution and have an African policy sooner rather than later. like to remind you that we produce less than 1%. And although some manufacturers have taken up the challenge and are producing, making efforts to produce vaccines, the example of BioVac shows that there's a real danger to the efforts that we've done so far. BioVac was established as a private-public partnership, to revive South Africa's human vaccine manufacturing capacity, and has been backed by the state to supply all the childhood vaccines that are used in South Africa to date. However, there's a new tender that the South African Health Department has come out with and inserted a clause that requires a local manufacturing, to compete with the arrangement that had previously allowed BioVac, to supply products. So you're shooting yourself in the foot. You've set up an institution to produce vaccines, and then you say, hey, I'm not going to give you the sole privilege of supplying vaccines that I'm going to buy. So you go and compete with people who can make the vaccine and bring the vaccine in for 50 cents while you are selling to me for $10. That is a killer. So it's strange because, as I said to you, BioVac or these vaccine entities, work with the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Science and Technology, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Trade. So the South African Department of Science and Innovation says that BioVac is doing very well. However, the Department of Health is saying, no, BioVac is not doing well. 15 years down the line, it's not able to make vaccines. So it's an example that is of great concern, because we know that you can't build a vaccine manufacturing facility in a few years. And if South Africa established this company, this institute has, 35%, government has almost 47% equity shares in the company, and yet is going to throw it all down the line after spending such a huge amount of money. Then where are we going with vaccine manufacturing in Africa? So for us as AVMI, we will continue to showcase the milestones that we've achieved in having the position papers, in having the background papers, and our recent partnership with TIBA, which is moving towards an integrated African vaccine policy plan. We hope that we will continue and engage some of you to join us in our mission to promote the establishment of sustainable human vaccine manufacturing in Africa. We will continue to catalyze and coordinate, the efforts and work with all partners, both public and human. And finally, this is our website, www.avmi-africa.org, and I encourage you to visit the website and join up so that we continue the efforts for Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Do we have questions for him? Please, I think you should just stay and take the question. Okay, Professor Abayomi here. Okay. Okay, so we have 2 hands. Anybody else? Questions, observations, need clarity? Okay. Joshua, where are you?
Thank you very much, Professor William, for yet another excellent presentation, which, whenever you speak, it's a mixture of feelings. Obviously, we're very proud of your academic prowess, but you always reveal to us that Africa is so far behind, and for no just reason, other than what I can only assume is poor government policy, structures, and implementation. The figure that we are only producing 1% of our vaccines is the most disgraceful slide I have ever seen in the last, for this year at least. there is absolutely no explanation on this planet that can justify that figure. Even to find anti-snake venom, where we have the richest diversity of snakes in Africa, we can't even make snake venom, anti-snake venom. Simple vaccines that just require identification of the epitope, which can be a direct inject into the patient. We're not talking about complex vaccines here. Just simple vaccines where you just need to identify the epitope and produce it through a good manufacturing plant is a problem for us. So I'm sure you didn't want to say what the real reasons are, but maybe you can oblige us. We're not children, so we should be able to take what you're going to tell us. Can you tell us what the real problem is? In simple English, so that we can understand, and maybe we can start to get together and do something about it. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a very good initiative. My question is actually, Prof, you specifically mentioned the African Union. We know it is more of a policy body that coordinates policy issues in Africa. You know, Africa is fragmented in terms of economic blocks. And thank God ECOWAS is now going towards a single currency and maybe a single monetary policy with regards to all our economic issues. But you have not mentioned how are you involving or engaging the other economic blocks? I know in East Africa there is the East African Economic Bloc. In Southern Africa they have one. I don't know whether there is one in North Africa or not. So how are you able to carry them along? Because drugs manufacture, I think, is an economic issue where you need to engage the economic systems across the continent. So can you just, in addition to what Professor Abayomi requested, let us know how you are engaging these different economic blocks to see that we are all on one page, to see that we move up from that 1% to maybe 56% in the next 1 year. Thank you.
Sorry, so my question is slightly easier. Yeah, it is a bit easier than the previous ones. But I'd actually been to see BioVac, and what was clear to me was that there seems to be a disconnect between what the manufacturing industry needs versus what we are teaching in our pharmacy schools. And so I was just curious, in the roadmap that you have spoken about, is there some move towards trying to bring on board the pharmacy schools as a way of trying to let them modify or tweak their curriculum so that it becomes more fit for what we need in the industry?
Thank you very much for the questions. I'll take the easiest one first. So yes, when we began the discussions on vaccine manufacturing, we realized that one major challenge was human resource capacity. And you're right, the curriculum in the biotechnology and the pharmaceutical schools does not concentrate on vaccine manufacturing. So as part of the discussions that we are having with some of our partners, we're looking to establish, specific modules, okay, that will give graduates in science and biotechnology specific orientation towards vaccine manufacturing. It's not easy to find people who are willing to even share their expertise. Because pharmaceutical companies, you know, when you even retire from a pharmaceutical company, you have these confidentiality agreements, etc., because of the competition between the agencies. So you're right. We're hoping that with the efforts to show that, you know, vaccine and pharmaceutical production in Africa is a sustainable opportunity, probably we will have naturally the academic curriculum being modified to include, you know, specific modules for this industry. I mean, for example, oil and gas industry in Ghana. When we had discoveries of oil in the western region of Ghana, the universities modified their curriculum and introduced, you know, oil and gas related, you know, modules right from the first year. So it's something that we hope will happen sooner rather than later, as the last speaker said. So I'll take your question as well. The regional economic communities. Actually, that's one part that I did not include because of time. So you find that the first study that we did show that, you know, working through the regional economic communities, of which there are actually 8 in Africa, if you take from the Eastern Mediterranean all the way down to SADC. There are actually 8 of them. You mentioned the East African Economic Community and then also ECOWAS, which is where we are. And because of the discussions that we've initiated on vaccine manufacturing in Africa, we actually have very interesting partnerships with some of the big pharma. For example, Merck. Merck have actually partnered with some of the German government agencies, and they held the first ever vaccine manufacturing forum in Arusha under the auspices of the East African Community. And that is also 160 million market, you know, for pharmaceutical products. So they are I understand that it's been a slow process, but I understand that some of these pharmaceutical partnerships between the developed and, you know, local partners in Africa are engaging with the East African community. I mean, I had the honor to moderate a session between the Rwandan Minister of Health, the Tanzanian Minister of Health, and then the East African guys. Actually, after the conference, I heard that Rwanda and Tanzania wanted to build factories straight away, which is not good for sustainability because you want a coherent regional policy. Okay, so it's something that has to be carefully nurtured, and the appropriate policies both at the regional level and at the AU. Now, why the AU? Which is your first part of your question. The AU is really important because the AU sets the policy for Africa. And there is an African, you know, pharmaceutical manufacturing plan. So if the AU sets the, you know, continental policy, this will enable the regional economic communities to then map out, you know, and decide what specific areas they would take up. I mean, ECOWAS could decide that, look, okay, we want to make polio vaccine. SADC could decide that, okay, we're going to make pentavalent vaccine. Now, why is the AU important? At the AU, there's also the efforts to harmonize the regional regulatory authorities. You heard about WHO. WHO sets the standards for the global community. And you need WHO pre-qualification in order to make a product which most countries will even buy. So, alongside this, the AU is also promoting the African Vaccine Regulatory Forum. It's called AVAREF. Okay, and this was back to the efforts before Ebola. Okay, and so there is also regulatory capacity building on the African continent to harmonize, you know, the different standards in the different regions and countries, so that, you know, there will be minimum quality, appreciable, acceptable quality across the regional economic forum and the member states. The most difficult question: what is the real problem? It's quite complicated. I remember in Addis Ababa, the first ministerial conference on immunization, my minister was present when we had this discussion. I think Seth Berkeley from, is it Gavi, and one of the other guys was there. And the minister asked me, so what should I do next? And I was taken aback. You know, just like you said, you want the thing in 1 year. There's no way you can make vaccines in 1 year. You need to sit down and have a plan. Now that minister is gone. So, unfortunately, the lack of, I don't want to say institutional memory, the lack of coherent institutional policies for African governments is one major challenge. You deal with one minister, one president, 4 years' time, there's a new set, and they have different priorities. Okay, maybe they're more interested in building hotels and hospitals than making vaccines to put into the hospitals. But that is the reality. You know, there are major competing interests that the ministers and the political authorities have to deal with. And there is no policy laid out showing that vaccine manufacturing is a major public health, investment across trade, finance, education. So, Professor Bayomi, I hope I have shed light on it. And then you also have to look at the international scene. I showed you that if I'm a minister of health or a minister of finance, why should I invest 100 million in something that I cannot show political impact in 10 years? I'll just go and find money, 10 million, 20 million, and buy the vaccine from Gavi. Okay? And the honest truth is that if we start making vaccines in Nigeria, initially it will be more expensive than the Gavi price, than the UNICEF price. So the Nigerian government has to bite the bullet and say, I'm going to buy the vaccine for $5 from my own company in the ECOWAS region than pay UNICEF and Gavi $1. You do that for 10, 15 years, then I hope that they will not change like BioVac. And then a new minister come and say, hey, you want to put in some regulation, and then you are out cold. When we had the discussion 2 weeks ago, there's a company in Kenya, it's called Dawa. It's one of the big pharmaceutical companies in Kenya. Because of the East African Vaccine Symposium that we had, this company has come up with a plan, $30 million to set up a vaccine manufacturing plant. They're looking for assurances from the Kenyan government because for them, they cannot spend $30 million and not be able to, recoup their money in, say, 5 or 10 years. They would go bust. Well, GSK, Sanofi, etc. $30 million is small feed. Is the money they spend on developing new drugs and etc. One clinical trial costs about $30 million. I haven't seen any African country invest even $5 million in an Ebola vaccine trial. Okay. So that's the stark reality, Professor Bayomi. We don't put our money where our mouth is. We keep on talking. So we need to talk more to the political leadership. If my good old mentor, Professor Tomori, was here, you would hear a different kind of language. Thank you.